Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome to True Crime and Wine. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherilyn and I am so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back. Thank you for joining me every single upload. I love and I appreciate you so stinking much. If you're new here, you're probably like, whoa, does she sound like that all the time? And if you're not new here, you're like, whoa, why does Sherilyn sound like that right now? My voice has been going haywire. This is actually like very impressive that I can talk right now because 2 days ago I couldn't. So if I'm sounding a little bit off, it's not your audio, it's just me. I told you last week that I was getting sick. And here we are, it happened. The good news is for those of you who don't like long intros, I'm getting right into it because I can't talk. And I don't know what I'm gonna sound like at the end of this video. So we're gonna get right into it. Before we do, I have a quick message for you. Before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor today for sponsoring another video, PDS Debt. I really appreciated hearing your feedback from personally having a chance to work with them and feeling like a weight is being lifted off of your shoulders. Debt can truly feel crippling sometimes, and I feel like it gets to the point where you just don't even know where to start. You've got it coming at every angle. You have outrageous interest fees to deal with on top of the already mounting pressure that you have. And I know you've probably felt like me, feeling like this isn't working. There has got to be a better way for me to pay this off. And PDS Debt has really tried to do that. They have customized 0% interest options for anybody out there that's struggling to pay off medical debt, credit cards, personal loans. They also understand that because of the tough few years that a lot of people have had because of COVID-19, certain types of debt can be reduced or even paid off much faster, which is going to save you thousands in interest. If you're wondering if they can help you out, PDS Debt is offering our qualified Civendales a free debt saving analysis just for completing their 30-second online debt assessment over at www.pdsdebt.com/Dale. With that, you are going to receive a full breakdown on how to save interest each month, plus the fastest way to pay that debt down. If you are somebody who is making those payments onto your card and you feel like the number is just not moving, this program is definitely for you. PDS Debt rolls all of your monthly payments into one low 0% interest payment. Everyone with over $10,000 or more of debt qualifies, and there is no minimum credit score required, so good or fair or poor credit is accepted. It's really nice to hear about a solution that will save you thousands in interest fees and also help you pay that debt off in a fraction of the time. Like I said, PDS Debt is offering a free debt analysis just for completing their quick and easy online quiz. All you have to do is go to pdsdebt.com/Dale. That's pdsdebt.com/Dale. Take back your financial freedom today by visiting pdsdebt.com/Dale. All right, and today's riddle is, I make two people out of one. What am I? All right, let's get started. I want to thank Kathy McGuire so much for the suggestion on this case. I had never heard of this before, and I just have no words besides what in the F-itty F. Today we are talking about the cold-blooded, merciless crimes of Dr. Debora Green. We are headed to Prairie Village, Kansas. The year is 1995. Prairie Village is described as a very upscale area. It's very appealing to those who make over $100,000 a year. You'll see a lot of doctors, lawyers, CEOs living in the area. And it's where the Farrar/Green family was living, in a quiet suburban area on Canterbury Court. They lived in this jaw-dropping 5,000 square foot home. It had 3 levels, a child's wing, and one of my all-time house goals, a pool. And it housed Father Michael, Mother Deborah, and their 3 children, Tim, Kate, and Kelly. It was one evening on October 23rd, 1995, that the picturesque family that people saw from the outside literally went up in flames when the house was caught on fire, taking the lives of 2 of the Farrar children and their 2 family dogs. Mike was not at home at the time of the fire, but he felt like he didn't need to be a witness to what had happened. He already knew in his heart, which led him to file for divorce from Debora Green the following day. Debora was born to Joan, who pronounced it Joanne to people. I don't know why, I always get a kick out of it when there's like a simple spelling of a name, like Joan, and she's like, it's Joanne. It's like somebody being named like Debora, and they're like, it's Debora. Anyways, Debora was born to Joanne and Robert Jones in Havana, Illinois on February 28, 1951. She was the second child and second daughter to her young parents. Her parents had fallen in love in high school and were married at 18 and 19. And Debora was their little genius. Allegedly, she taught herself how to read at 2.5 by reading the newspaper, and she would send letters to her family in the mail when she was only like 2. Joanne was said to be more of the disciplinarian. She was hard on the girls when it came to school and studying particularly, and Robert was more chill. Some people believe that Joanne was more strict with the girls, especially when it came to success and studying, because she wanted them to be successful and attain their dreams, because she really didn't get an opportunity to do that. After high school, she turned down going to university and her dream of being a teacher so that she could get married to Bob and be a mom. And it seems like that was kind of something that she felt in her life that she wished she had accomplished. Debora and her sister were both exceptional students, although it did seem to come much more naturally to Debora. Now that I said Debora, I keep having to correct myself because I want to call her Debora. When it came to studying and quizzes, Debora didn't even need to pick up a textbook or study at all. She just naturally got straight A's. She was also gifted in music. She played the piano and the violin, and she was also very athletic. In her junior year, the family moved to Peoria. Instead of Debora being shy and withdrawn at a new school, she did the absolute opposite. She flourished. Her grades were never a question, so she was able to put in all of that work socially to build friendships. She quickly became a part of the popular crowd. She was a cheerleader, part of the student council. She sang in choir, was in the French club, athletic club. She did it all. She was like her dad when it came to humor. He was always cracking jokes and making people laugh, and all of her friends at school said she was the same. They also said that she knew she was going to be successful one day. It was just not a matter of if, but when and how. It was going to happen. She was going to make it happen. Even her teachers said that whenever they thought about Debora, they thought, wow, that kid's going somewhere. When she graduated, she was co-valedictorian with another student who also had perfect grade point averages. She went to the University of Illinois, where she thought she wanted to be a chemical engineer, but her professor told her, listen, the profession is so saturated right now. You are so smart. You can completely set yourself apart if you were to go into something like medicine. So she took chemistry in pre-med, and after 3 years, she graduated. And for med school, she chose University of Kansas so that she could be close to home. When it came to being a doctor, she was really not feeling it. She always wanted to be an engineer just because math and breaking things down was just her natural way of processing day-to-day life. While she was in school, actually, she did fall in love with an engineer student. His name was Debora Green. They got married while they were still in school in a very chill ceremony. It was 3 years after they married that she graduated in 1975. And after graduation, she chose her residency in an ER. Out of all of the medical avenues that she had done in school, emergency seemed to be what she excelled in the most. It sounds like her idea of the ER as well was something that would constantly keep her active and busy. And it did, but it wasn't the way that she pictured in her head. She felt like it was actually quite boring because people were coming in that she felt like should have been treated by their family doctor before, and then they just let a symptom get out of control and now they ended up in the ER. For example, an earache she would talk about. The patient could have easily gone to the family doctor, gotten some antibiotics, and the earache would have been taken care of, but they let it get out of control to the point where the pain was so unbearable they needed to go to the ER. Another seemed like a good idea at the time moment for Debora was her marriage. It turns out they weren't overly compatible. Interest in engineering seemed to be the only thing that they had in common. So they ultimately decided to separate and file for divorce, but Debora always kept Green as her last name because she felt like she had started to build her career with that name. After the divorce, for a brief time, Debora went all out. She was living her best single life, going out and getting lit all the time because most of her life had been surrounded by school and studying. So she did some traveling, had a lot of like nights out with the gals. But not long after, she met another resident. His name was Mike Farrar, and she felt like he really matched her wit and intelligence. Mike was very enamored with Debora. everybody who met her said that she just had this natural charisma about her, where she was so smart and there was no doubt how intelligent she was, but she was also able to match it with a stellar sense of humor. Early on in the relationship, though, he did start to notice that Debora was also very hot-tempered. If she was upset about something, she would go from 0 to 100 in seconds. One incident that I read about in Anne Rule's book on the case was when they were in a parking lot and this couple had taken the parking stall that she was wanting, and she got out of the car, followed the couple, just screaming at them, berating them, making this huge scene in the parking lot over taking this parking stall, to the point where this couple was being screamed at so intensely that they got in the car and gave her the spot. He kind of tried to justify and explain it away that she just needed some more social growing pains because she was so used to getting everything that she wanted so effortlessly because of how smart she was. She didn't have to try for things. So when something as small as a parking stall or a delay in a flight happened and she didn't have that control over it, she didn't know what to do. Despite the red flags, though, he asked her to marry him, and on May 26, 1979, they were married. Side note, remember how I was always saying like so much stuff happens on May 26th, and I remember the day because it was my parents' wedding anniversary? May 26th. Again, I think even in the last video, something was on May 26th. What's with May 26th? At the time of them getting married, Debora was definitely the breadwinner. He was still interning. She was already in practice. And he felt like as she continued to get successful, instead of becoming more humble, she became more entitled. And I do feel like it can either go two ways. I personally have had people in my life who I felt were completely changed because of money. Debora took that path. She felt like money meant she was above everybody, specifically his family. She had no interest or desire to get to know them. And it was really hard for Mike because he's very close with his family. He was raised to make it work, though. His family, like I said, was very loving and close. And his parents told their children that marriage was always something that was worth fighting for. So that's what he was prepared to do. They found common interests in things like traveling together. That was something that they really loved doing. And I think it's something that kept them united. Whenever things were feeling a little bit stale, they just took a trip. The main thing that their relationship was really lacking, Mike said, was affection. Debora was just not one of those warm and fuzzy lovey-dovey gals. She would much rather use her free time instead of spending it with her husband reading a book. Mike even said on their wedding night, she told him it wasn't going to happen because she was reading a book instead. Life went on, though. Mike became a heart specialist. Debora carried on in the ER field, which never got better, or something that she enjoyed. Many patients said they were scolded by her for not getting treated like having pneumonia because she said, well, you should have gone to your family doctor if you felt these cold symptoms. She was really not a fan favorite with patients. And other physicians that worked with her also found it very difficult because she could never be wrong. If someone did not agree with her opinion or her diagnosis and they had a question about it, she would just pop off, parking lot style. Over time, Mike started noticing more concerning behavior. He would notice pills prescribed to patients in her purse, and she would just have some sort of excuse like, oh, I took those to log it into the chart and I forgot to give it back to them. As much as he wanted to question further, he didn't, because he wanted to see the good in Debora and move forward with the marriage, which they did. 2 years into the marriage, Debora finds out she's pregnant. Kids is something both of them wanted, so they were both thrilled. And on January 20th, 1982, they welcomed their first child, Tim. Both of them took to parenthood very naturally, and although Debora didn't intend to ever be a stay-at-home mom long term, people who knew her said that she took 6 weeks off to bond with Tim, and she used every ounce of that time to soak in as much as she could. 2 years later, she got to do it all over again when on December 27th, 1984, they welcomed their little girl, Kate. For the next 4 years, Mike and Debora just really focused on building their practices separately. Mike was in cardiology. There was a brief time that Debora tried to go into oncology, but she kept failing the exam program to be board certified. So for a brief time, she was trying to open up her own practice. But like I said, she really wasn't this warm and fuzzy person. So when you're trying to deal with patients who have a diagnosis that can be terminal and you visibly show that you're annoyed if an emergency happens and you have to go into the hospital to see them, that's probably not the best route. Then 4 years after their daughter Kate was born, they had another baby girl named Kelly. 2 was always Debora's plan, so 3 was never on her to-do list, and briefly it caused a little bit of tension in the marriage. But on the surface, whenever Debora did show a very loving and nurturing side, it came to her kids. She was a very involved mother. She was at every single dance practice, dance recital, any of the sports that Tim was involved in. She even taught her children how to swim, and the family traveled a lot together. Mike and Debora definitely wanted to instill that desire to explore and see the world into their children. Eventually in her career, she stopped taking patients and she took on a position that was much more her style in peer review as well as medical claims, because she didn't like to be looked at if somebody had questions about her, but she had absolutely no problem doing it if it was towards somebody else. This job also allowed her to be more hands-on as a mom. She got to do the school pickups, the drop-offs, take them to all of their extracurriculars, and then she also got to join a country club as well. I'm not gonna lie, there's a country club kind of close to our house, and I'm always like, well, I see the pool and I'm like, I want to go to the country club. But then I know that I'll just feel just as uncomfortable as I did when I was always the youngest mom picking up my daughter at daycare, taking her to a birthday party, and then you get like the judgy eyes. I'll get the country club judges. Irrelevant, sorry guys. By this point in the marriage, things are maxed. There was just no love there. A lot of those public outbursts from Debora were becoming more frequent, and her husband was just feeling like he was walking on eggshells. Mike asks for a divorce, and it went about as well as expected. Debora started throwing things around the house at him in front of their children. She was also screaming so loud at him that he just didn't even know what was coming out of her mouth, which reaffirmed to him that this was the best decision, and he moved out. He said when he moved out, though, things ended up getting better. He was still in contact with her and the kids every single day. He went over to see the kids as much as he could, and when he did, they got along so well, and he was able to see the side of Debora that he loved before, that humor. And over time, he's like, well, shit, what did I do here? Should we reconcile? They did talk about it, and they agreed they had gotten this far in their family. They helped each other make very successful practices. Their children were brilliant. If they were united, and really together, they could just give them the world, and the sky would be the limit for them. So they decide to give it another shot, another good shot. I was going to say go and shot at the same time. Their condition, though, was that they wanted a whole fresh start, sell their home, buy a new one, and they found this gorgeous, almost $500,000 home, 5 bedrooms, the pool, the child wing, the works. The day they had to sign on the house, though, Mike started to get cold feet. He told Debora, I just don't know if I can do this yet. I want to definitely make sure that we can continue moving forward the way that we have been. She and the kids were really upset, but she said to him, I understand. Days later, he gets a call from a neighbor, and the neighbor's saying, you need to get to the family home that the kids and Debora were still living in and make sure that Debora and the kids and the dog are okay because it's on fire. He rushes to the house, calls Debora, and they're fine. They all happen to be at her son's soccer game, and they even brought the dog with them to watch too. The house was severely damaged. The firefighters found out that the fire had started in the basement and made its way upstairs. When the investigator came, they found that this wire from the dehumidifier was wrapped around the copper watering pipe, and they believed that it got too hot and started a fire. That was the least of Mike's concerns, though. Seeing the house and feeling for that brief moment before he talked to Debora that his family was maybe in there and that he could have lost them made him realize that he didn't want to be without them. He goes back to the realtor and he says, all right, I'm ready to move forward. And they purchased that house that they had just found. 6 months into living in the new house, they were definitely in the honeymoon phase. Everything seemed to be on track and perfect, and like Mike had made the right decision. However, as the excitement of a new house and Christmas and a trip to Disneyland subsided, it turns out they were no better off than they were before. Like I said before, affection was a really big part of Mike's love language, which was the furthest from Debora. It got to the point where he just couldn't go on denying his feelings, but he decided to wait until May when him and Debora and Tim were scheduled to go to Peru on a school trip. At the time, things were really tense between Mike and his son, Tim. Debora had used Tim as almost like a venting outlet about her feelings and problems that were going on in the marriage. It really caused Tim to see Mike in a bad light. It even caused them to have physical fights because he would like attack his dad. So Mike thought, if I go on this trip with him, this is a really good chance to make a good memory together. On the trip, there was a mother of one of the students who was also in a very similar situation at home. We'll call her C. C was in a loveless marriage to a doctor as well. She was also in the medical field. She was a nurse, and they were hanging on by a thread for the kids. Her husband didn't go on the trip, but she did. Immediately, she noticed Mike. And one of the things that she noticed about him was how attentive he was to Debora. And she found herself wishing that her husband back at home would be like that. Even though C and Mike hadn't communicated, Debora could feel something. And she was sending her, don't even look at my man vibes. She went out of her way to exclude C from any of the other conversations with the other moms. But C said she did admit that she found Debora hilarious and very smart and wished that she was more involved in conversations because she got a kick out of her. After the trip, C and Mike couldn't stop thinking about each other. There was this unexplained natural energy between them. Obviously, that was something that Debora had felt. And one afternoon when he went to go drop off some things from the trip and some photos that he had taken to C's house, they started an affair. Mike was still wanting a divorce, although I don't think that that is an excuse to start an affair. If you're feeling that way, you just gotta man up and say it. But he was pushing it off because he knew how Debora was going to react, and he was just trying to avoid the inevitable. In July, he finally found the moment, and as expected, it was explosive. Debora started screaming again, throwing things at him. She started hitting herself. She also brought the kids, who were only 13, 10, and 6 at the time, into the room to tell them what was happening, saying that their dad didn't love them, and using vulgar language to say that he was seeing another woman. For a brief time for the kids, he wanted to still live in the house, just in separate areas. It was decided that Debora would sleep in the guest house and him in the main. Allegedly, she started pouring herself even more into her books, but she started gravitating to true crime. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I mean, if anybody looked at my Kindle library, they'd have questions. Daily, Mike was wanting to find a place of his own, but at this time as well, Debora was coping with drinking heavily. And even though the kids were pushing away from him, he just didn't want to leave them with her. They're doing the best they can to make things as normal as they can for the kids. They're even having dinners together. And all of a sudden, Mike starts to become violently ill, to the point where he was hospitalized for a week. And then when he was stable and discharged, he was back in the emergency that evening after having dinner again. Now, in the other house of the house that C lived in, seeing Mike sick and wanting to be there to help him, she realized it was time to tell her husband that she could no longer be married to him either. And it turned out to be a very unfortunate situation because her husband, although unable to show his affection and really give her any signs while they were together that he loved her, he was unable to cope with the divorce and ended up taking his life. While Mike's in the hospital, doctors are not able to figure out what is causing him to be so ill. His friends, though, and C are feeling like Debora's behind it, which he absolutely wouldn't believe. Yes, he had seen her be quite volatile. Yes, their marriage was ending, but he just couldn't see this person that he had known for 17 years want to harm him or be able to harm him. Then one afternoon, after he was discharged from the hospital, he finds this stash of all of these bags of seeds, of castor oil seeds. And for the first time, he thinks, why would she have this? Is this something that could harm me if she's putting it in my drink? Like, is she poisoning me? He ends up confronting her, and she says she had all of them because she wanted to take her life since he wanted to leave. With her making this threat, he calls the police and has her admitted for an evaluation. She was actually taken to the same hospital that she was once an ER doctor at, and she was admitted voluntarily. While she was at the hospital being treated, Mike stayed home with the kids, which was a great opportunity for him to get in some much needed bonding time. Debora ended up being diagnosed with major bipolar depression and suicidal suicidal impulses. She was given 3 different medications, and after only 4 days of being treated, she discharged herself. While she was away, Mike had started looking more into these castor seeds, and he finds out that the shell itself isn't dangerous, but inside the shell, it contains ricin poison. Because he was finding this out when it wasn't immediately after it was digested, it was impossible for a test to confirm if it was in fact ricin poisoning. Although there was a way to test if he had antibodies built up into his system, but getting those results was going to take a while. Needless to say, he just felt like it didn't sound very right, and he knew he had to get out of that house when Debora was discharged. So he found an apartment and moved out. In his mind, he never felt like the kids were ever in danger. He also didn't necessarily feel like he himself was in danger and that she intended to kill him, but almost just keep him sick so that she could take care of him, and then maybe he would change his mind and want to stay. He ends up renting an apartment, still trying to be as actively involved in his kid's life as he can. He attends every sporting event, every dance practice. Both of his daughters had landed roles in a Nutcracker performance. Kate was cast as Clara and Kelly was cast as one of the angels. On top of that, Tim was in soccer and hockey, so it was always busy, and he did his best to be as present as he possibly could. Initially, Debora and Mike started making strides in co-parenting quite well together. They started their divorce proceedings. They even planned out how they were going to move forward together. Debora seemed to be accepting the situation, although she would make a lot of comments to people, especially the kids, about a woman that zeroed in and swooped her husband, and like I said, used very vulgar and graphic language to describe it to her kids. With him being away, there was that wedge that was coming in between him and his kids, specifically Tim. On October 21st, they all attended Tim's soccer game, and all of the kids were set to go and spend the night at Mike's apartment. The two oldest ones, though, ended up calling Debora to come and pick them up. This wasn't the first time they did that. It's hard when you're a child going through a situation like Mike and Debora were, because if you have a parent like Debora and you're being fed all of this horrible stuff about your other parent that you only see on weekends, you really start to believe it. That's what was going on here. Although the youngest daughter, Kelly, she was always there for her dad. She was only 6 years old, but she was like an old soul. She would always say really comforting things to him, like, "It'll be okay, Dad." 2 days later, on October 23rd, Mike took Tim to go to hockey while Kate was at her ballet practice and Debora was at a psychiatrist appointment. When it was over around 8:30 p.m., he dropped the kids off. He said despite the 2 evenings prior where the kids were upset with him, it was a great evening. They had a lot of fun. They were laughing. When he dropped them off, he stayed for just about 5 minutes, visited, and then left. He went to have dinner at his lady friend's, and while he was there was about 5 pages from Debora. The first page, when he called back, she denied her calling. She said it must have been one of the kids. The next time she had a question about his lawyer. Another one was, "What are you doing?" When he got home around 11:30, she called again, and he said he could tell in her voice that she was drinking, and it just set him off. He had kept his feelings and his emotions to himself this whole time, and that night he just laid it all out there. He said, "I know you're abusing alcohol." He said, "You need to stop. You need to use your time and focus more on getting professional help and get yourself better." And as he's unloading, he's just getting angrier and angrier, and although he wasn't going to say anything, he ends up telling her that he knows she tried to poison him. And he says something along the lines of, like, "You're out of your mind, to come to think of it, like, the kids shouldn't even be with you." He hung up and he was like, "Well, crap, I really wasn't going to say anything about the poison." He hadn't even got test results back, so he wasn't even sure if he was justified to make that accusation. And he didn't even know why he had brought up the kids at all, because like I said, he never ever felt like they were in danger. That was one thing about Debora, was that she was always a good mom, so he would have never wanted to take them away from her. As he was reflecting, he thought after the call, maybe this wake-up call will help her want to get better for the kids. But she would never have that chance. Around 11:45 p.m., Debora wakes up her neighbors by pounding on their door. She's begging for them to help her because her house is on fire. As they look back, they see Kate, who's standing on the garage with just these flames billowing behind her. Debora runs over to tell her to jump. Kate jumps. Debora wasn't able to catch her, but she survived the fall and she wasn't hurt. And when she gets up, she's just looking around frantically for her siblings. Everyone who's on the scene just said she was screaming at the top of her lungs for somebody to help them, and Debora seemed to have this look of shock, just standing there staring while Kate is screaming. First responders were dispatched to the house when there was a call placed from the house to 911. But when the operator answered, all they could hear was breathing on the other end, and then the line went dead. Something about it didn't feel right though, so she sent help. As soon as that first police car turned, he sees this orange flame, just undeniable that it's a fire. He calls for backup. He runs to the house. He passes Kate, who's begging him to save her siblings, and he realizes there's still people inside. He's desperately trying to find any way to get into the house. Windows, front door, back door, side door, garage. He said every way was impossible. He had never seen a fire take over as fast as this one had. Around midnight, Mike gets a call from the neighbor that Debora had woken up saying, "You need to come to the house now." The neighbor's screaming, saying, "Your house is on fire. There are fire trucks everywhere." She even goes as far to say, just based on her interactions with Debora and the way that Debora came to the house and how she was just completely zoned out, she says, your wife is an effing arsonist. He books it out the door. When he gets to the house, it's full of first responders. And when he runs to the yard, he's looking at the flames, and his first response was, "Oh my gosh, like how are we going to replace all of the things that the kids are going to need?" There was no thought in his mind that anyone was still in there. It's not until an officer comes up and asks him who he is, and he says that he's the owner of the house and asks him to take him to the kids, that he finds out that only one of his children and Debora are the only ones out of the house, and that his two other children are still in there. Looking at the house and just seeing that it is completely engulfed in flames, he just lets out this like agonizing scream and breaks down. The firefighters were doing everything that they could to fight the flames and locate the children. They weren't able to put out the fire until 1:45 a.m. No one wanted to admit it, but just looking at the scene, everybody knew that the chances of the two of them surviving were very bleak. After Debora and Kate were looked over at the hospital, police took Debora in for some questions. They asked Debora right off the bat if she had been drinking, and she said that she had 1.5 drinks and that she thought she went to bed around 9:30 or 10. She said around 11 she could hear footsteps in the kitchen, so she got up to check, and it was Tim, who was just making a snack. She said about 45 minutes later she woke to her alarm panel going off, and when she opened up her bedroom door she saw a bunch of smoke, and she just ran for help. Before she got out of the house though, she said that she heard Tim's voice come over the intercom. He asked her what he should do, and she just said, "Stay where you are, I'm going to get help for you." Then cryptically she looks at the detectives and is like, "I guess that was the kiss of death." Like freaking goosebumps, nausea, rage, so many emotions right now. She made numerous disturbing statements. She'd already was referring to her children in the past tense, even though nothing had been confirmed. When the detective was asking a little bit about their lives and what they did, she was saying how they all went to Pembroke Hills School, and then corrected herself and went, "Well, the living ones do." She also spoke about her divorce proceedings and just dragging Mike. I know we don't know how people would react in these situations, but I feel like I wouldn't be able to conduct an interview. I would just constantly be asking, "Where are my children? What's wrong with my children? Like, what's going on? Do we have any news?" I don't know. Her timelines were also all over the place. She said she only called Mike once that evening, but then said that the last time they spoke was around 11:30, 11:45, even though she said she initially went to bed around 9:30, 10, and that 11:45 she was woken up by the sound of the alarm. When she's asked about the fire, she says she has no idea how it started. She didn't light any candles, and she hadn't even used the stove or oven to cook that night because they had got KFC for takeout. Sadly, during the interview, the remains of Tim and Kelly were found, as well as the two family dogs. The whole thing is just so horrific. This is why it's so hard to do children's cases. Tim's remains were found on the main level of the house. The fire had burned a hole through the floor of his bedroom. The absolute only, I guess, comfort is when it came to Kelly and one of the family dogs, it appeared they never woke up. It's most likely that they died from carbon monoxide poisoning because she was still in her bed, tucked in, looked like she was just sleeping, and the dog was under the bed. When they tell Debora about her children, this was the first time that they saw any form of emotion, and it was not devastation, grief, she started berating the detectives. She said, "I should have let Tim leave when he asked me. I saved one of my kids. You should have saved the other two." Multiple times she said how pathetic they were, how pathetic of a job they had done. They had been sitting here torturing her with questions for 4 hours instead of them giving her updates on what was going on with her kids. And then at this point, she cut off the questioning and demanded that she go to the house and that she be taken to Mike because she wanted to grieve with her husband. Mike was in another room being questioned actually at the time, and his reaction is what I guess what you would think it would be if you found out that your children had passed. It was just pure devastation. And he said, as much as he didn't want to admit it, when he saw the house, he just knew. Right away, the investigators asked him if he thought there was any possibility that Debora was responsible. And this was the first time where he was processing the drinking, the depression, the divorce, that he looked at them and said, yeah, maybe. It's at this time that he also officially tells law enforcement that he suspected her of poisoning him. The following day, a fire investigation is started, and right away they can just see from the burn pattern that there was an accelerant that was poured. It was all over the living room, all over the furniture, and it went all the way up the stairs where the children's quarter was, up their stairs and into the hallways in front of their bedrooms. At that point, there is an official ruling that the fire was deliberate, and when they approach Debora, she immediately starts pointing the finger at Mike's lady friend. She says has the most to gain out of this because she can have Mike all to herself. She implies that the intention was to also eliminate his wife as well. Investigators did look at all possible suspects and avenues, but on November 22nd, almost a month after the fire, they had enough evidence to rule out everyone except for Debora. She was actually arrested outside of the Nutcracker dance recital when she was going to watch her daughter. Her daughter had decided to go forward with the performance, and while she was in the parking lot without her daughter, she was arrested. She was charged with murder, arson, and attempted murder. And her pre-trial, if I was in the courtroom, I would really probably have a hard time keeping my composure. Her defense was that she never poisoned her husband and that he just must have caught something on their Peru trip. And the audacity to say that the arsonist was Tim, who had a fascination with matches. They even went as far as to insinuate that Tim often made meals at the house for his siblings. And since there was a rocky relationship between him and his father, there was no way to prove 100% that he wasn't the one who intended to poison his dad. For the record, a salesperson at a local flower shop was able to testify that the packets were sold to Debora, not Tim. The judge did not believe that Tim was the one who poured the accelerant all over the house, specifically up the stairs in front of his siblings and his bedroom, and then locked himself in after igniting the flames. So trial was set to move forward. Before trial, though, Debora confessed to starting the fire to her lawyers. She said she was drinking and she didn't remember what happened, although she was reading a true crime book that evening, and the book involved children who died in a fire that was started deliberately by their mom. She ended up taking an Alford plea, which allowed her to not admit guilt, but admit that there was enough evidence to find her guilty. And the judge sentenced her to 2 40-year sentences that are to be served concurrently with no chance of parole. I felt so uncomfortable about this case because anytime there's discussion of mental health, I always want to kind of look into that and dig a little bit deeper. I feel like in this situation, though, it's so much different than the Andrea Yates case that we talked about a few weeks ago. And a psychiatrist that had worked with Debora tried to explain that her inner emotional control is very limited. It's like it was stunted when she was a child, and so she reacts childlike and is then able to handle and control her emotions. Basically, like when you see a toddler or a really young child try to express themselves or deal with things that they're not happy about, they have a tantrum. And so she would have these tantrums and then not know how to, woosa and control and bring herself back, which I guess could explain all of the outbursts that she had anytime, there was like a minor inconvenience in her life. But I mean, even with that type of diagnosis, it's just so hard for me to understand and empathize with, I guess. Mike says he has no doubt that she chose to take their children's lives to hurt him because he had hurt her. She thought if he was going to try to take them, then no one could have them. I guess my struggle also is that I do find Debora very manipulative. So and she's very intelligent. So I feel like there could be a chance that people who have treated her might get the perception that she's unable to control her emotions, but there's also the possibility that she's very, very vindictive. For example, when she was in court and she was speaking to the judge to submit her Alford plea, she put on a show and took responsibility, said that her only goal was to be a good mother, and for the rest of her life, even if she was in prison, she wanted to make up for it with her remaining daughter and hoped Mike had a happy life and that they were able to move on and have a really strong relationship together. But then, based on letters that she sent to her daughter when her daughter was only 11, not long after her sentencing, she's saying in the letters that the reason she drank was because of Mike leaving her and she didn't know how to handle it. She said that Tim would never want his sister to forgive their dad and just to remember how much Tim hated Mike, and that she was pretty sure that Tim was the one that was trying to poison Mike. So I don't really believe that she wanted to do the right thing. And I do believe that she is very intelligent and able to control her emotions, but she doesn't want to. It's just so heartbreaking that 2 little lives were lost so early. Tim was a phenomenal athlete, whether it was soccer or hockey. He gave every single ounce of himself, even if it was just practice. He took on so much at a young age, not only having to hear the things that his mom was feeding to him and kind of being her support. He was also often the one taking care of his sisters at the house when his mom was drinking. He would pack their lunches for the next day, feed them dinner. He was also very fearless, and anytime there was someone in an underdog situation or being picked on, Tim was there to defend them. And Kelly, she's described as just this loving little girl. She was an old soul and just mature beyond her years. She had the biggest heart. When she passed, her classmates made an area in the class that is called Kelly's Corner. They ended up decorating it with these painted tiles where they painted things involving Kelly, whether she was in the photos or it was things that she liked. There were tiles painted of her dancing, her dog Boomer that she loved, one of her swinging on the swing because she loved playground. And the corner was made for quiet reading, wind down time because Kelly really loved to read. We also can't forget the 2 family dogs, Boomer and Russell. Ugh, my freaking heart, man. The last article that I found involving Mike, he's still practicing cardiology. He still suffers long-term damage caused by being poisoned. He's had multiple heart surgeries, brain surgeries, countless trips to the hospital with infections. Just this everlasting reminder of what not only was done to him, but I'm sure when he thinks about those things, he thinks about his kids that were lost because of the person who did this to him. I can't. All right, that is it for me today. I'm burning up and I'm just raging, and I don't think it's because of my fever. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. The answer to today's riddle, that's what I say every time. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but I don't know how to today's riddle is I make 2 people out of 1. What am I? And the answer is a mirror. I thought of the 1990s movie Multiplicity with Michael Keaton. It's one of my favorites. That's not the answer. But the doctor who clones them, he makes multiple people out of 1. 1 Michael Keaton, and then there's like 4 Michael Keatons. I will also accept Michael Keaton as the answer. I have to go to bed. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.